Fantastic. All
All
right.
all right.
So thank you, Shane, and everybody for being here tonight. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to spread a little bit of nutrition knowledge. And it was a great intro by Shane because I am very different when it comes to sport nutrition and my focus for sport nutrition. So I am going to be talking about nutrition periodization and metabolic efficiency for endurance athletes, for cyclists tonight. And I'm going to focus on, I'm going to kind of tell you a story throughout. So I'm not going to just jump into what's a carbohydrate, protein, and fat, or what should we just do for strength training. Like, I'm going to make it a little bit more global, and then I'm going to just really funnel it in to specific to strength training, as you'll see once we get to the middle and towards the end. But I am infamous for throwing out what I call golden nuggets throughout the presentation. So golden nuggets, basically 2 or 3 things that you may take from the presentation that you can utilize immediately, or that's really sparked your interest. You're like, wow, that's really interesting. I need to write that down. I need to maybe ask some questions about it. So some of this may be new, some of it may not be. It kind of depends, honestly, if you've heard me speak or not, or if you've read any of my articles or any of my books that I have, because I do have a different approach. So a little bit about me, but I'm not going to really hone in on this. I am a registered dietitian. I've been a registered dietitian focusing only on sport nutrition for endurance athletes for the past 19 years as a registered dietitian. Been doing this for 23 years. I've been around the block. I am a professional high performance coach. You can just kind of read through the list, right? I'm a strength coach. I'm an exercise physiologist. I have a few degrees in this stuff, but more importantly, I'm also an athlete myself, and am going through active strength training. How appropriate! I am going through a strength block myself right now. So that's just a little bit about me. I've been around before, and I actually developed the concept that I'm going to be discussing tonight, called nutrition periodization and metabolic efficiency training. So I like to refer to myself as the foremost expert in those 2 concepts. I'm not the expert on everything, but those 2 concepts, I know my way around. So here's what we're going to be doing tonight. First thing, I need to kind of level the playing field. I need to discuss very briefly what the physiological or physical energy systems are in our body. So we're going to start with the energy systems. Then we're going to progress into chatting about nutrition periodization, what it is, metabolic efficiency training, what that is, and then specifically hone in onto now, how do we take all of this nutrition information and plug it into a strength block or a strength training focus. So that's going to be our progression. And again, I like to, when I present, I like to kind of tell it as a story, like we're going to go through different chapters, and we're just going to enjoy each chapter and every page that we turn here. So to start with, and I know this probably is not new and it's not supposed to be groundbreaking, but there are basically 2 energy systems in the body, anaerobic and aerobic. And you can see on the left here, the anaerobic actually has 2 parts. There's what's called an ATP-CP or PC system. That's your immediate energy. And I'll show you on the next slide, but that's usually about the first 10 to 12 seconds. That's that burst. It's that power. It's getting off the pedals. It's that sprint. It's that attack in the weight room or at home. It's lifting a little bit heavier weight, or maybe some power, some plyometrics. And then in anaerobic energy system, there's also what's called anaerobic glycolysis. So that is not the first 10 seconds. It kind of goes out for about 30, maybe 60 seconds. So that's your immediate energy that your body gets. The reason I'm putting this up is because there is a huge nutrition influence based on the time of the year and what you're doing both in the saddle and out of the saddle. So obviously you guys are very privy to the aerobic energy system, but let me show you a really cool graph here. And this kind of describes the correlation between energy systems in our body. Because a lot of people say, oh, I just do an anaerobic effort, or I'm just aerobic. Well, in fact, the first few seconds of any effort, right, even just getting up out of your chair, it actually incorporates all 3 energy systems. And you can see this by the lines here. So we've got time on the bottom from the left to right. We've got time in seconds from 0 all the way to 6 minutes, 360 seconds. And you can see initially on the left, that ATP system, that energy system, that burst of energy for about the first 10 to 12 seconds, that is super high, but you go through it extremely fast. So again, think of a 10-second sprint on the bike. Like, that is your ATP immediate energy system. That actually utilizes almost all carbohydrates. And we'll be telling that story a little bit more tonight. The anaerobic glycolysis, that green line, you can see it actually increased. So the ATP starts high and goes down. The anaerobic glycolysis starts low and goes up, but then starts to kind of peter out after about 60 to 90 seconds. So those two, that anaerobic energy system is fueled almost primarily by carbohydrates. Your aerobic system, while there still is a carbohydrate influence to your aerobic training and aerobic system, it's predominantly, although we're going to argue that a little bit towards the end of the presentation tonight, it's predominantly fueled by fat. So that's just to kind of give you a little bit of a lesson in the energy systems if you didn't already know that. So let's jump in to the big picture. So here's kind of where we're going tonight. If you look at the bottom, the foundation of everything that I do from a nutrition perspective is what's called nutrition periodization. So basically, and we'll get into this in the next few slides, basically it is aligning your nutrition based on your training cycle to support both health and performance related goals. So today we are only focusing kind of on that base strength training, if you will, right? Because that's what Shane wanted me to cover. But as we progress through the year, going through kind of a base aerobic, going through competition, and even going through off season, nutrition will change as your volume and intensity changes on the bike and even off the bike, right? So that's the whole concept in nutrition periodization. We always want to acknowledge what training cycle you're in, because that will help you feed yourself or really negotiate the nutrition puzzle. So as we move up from here, we look at metabolic efficiency training. And again, I'm kind of teasing you along here, but we're going to talk about that in detail also a little bit later. But metabolic efficiency training, again, this is kind of shaped like a bell. It is shaped like a bell-shaped curve. The focus is the majority, right? That's the middle that you see. You have the outliers on each side, and the outliers in terms of nutrition are on the left, your low carb, high fat diet. So that's your LCHF and your ketogenic diets. And on the right, you have the HCLF. That's the high carb, low fat diet. So there are athletes who negotiate those fairly successfully and a lot of athletes who don't. But my point is there are some outliers there, like some people that follow more on the LCHF and the HCLF, but the majority of people, they kind of find that sweet spot right in the middle. So metabolic efficiency training, I'm not going to give it away too much yet, and I'm not going to define it just yet, but suffice to say that it is comprised of 75% nutrition and 25% exercise or training. And we'll come back to that quite a bit, but I just wanted you to see the big picture. Let's go ahead and launch right in to nutrition periodization now. So nutrition periodization, like I was mentioning, nutrition should support the changes in volume and intensity that you do on and off the bike throughout the entire year, right? So an easy way to put that is what I've come up with is eat to train. So eat to support your training session. Don't train to support your eating habits, right? So that's kind of saying, well, don't, just because you had a 3 or 4 hour ride, don't justify that by having, a box of donuts and whatever. Like, don't destroy your nutrition just because you trained a lot, right? So we want to kind of change the paradigm and say, okay, we're going to eat to support that 3 hour ride, or more importantly for today, we're going to eat to support the strength work that you do in and out of either the gym or your home, right? Because that's the focus here. We want to eat specifically for the physiological adaptations that you are seeking. So let me show you, because I love looking at goals and looking at pictures, but these are the 5 goals on why you should really focus on nutrition periodization instead of following a diet, instead of just picking on carbs, protein, and fat individually, really looking at the big picture with this periodizing your nutrition. So one is to manipulate body weight, body composition safely and effectively, not crazy diets, not going ketogenic and lose a whole bunch of weight and then not being able to sustain that. Secondly, it's improving hormonal influence of appetite. We're going to talk about blood sugar regulation quite a bit and why that's so important and how to do it. Supporting your immune system and gut health, which is uber important these days with this COVID-19 going on. Obviously, we want to have a strong immune system. Gut health, if you haven't heard before me saying this, but your gut is very in line with your immune system. To have a very well functioning and healthy gut means you're going to have a healthy immune system also. So those two are interrelated. Periodizing sports supplements. So we're going to talk about supplements towards the end, so I can just touch on that. And then lastly, I know this sounds a little bit weird, but creating a healthy relationship with food. So there are different times that we eat. We either eat out of physical or biological hunger, and that's when your stomach is grumbling, or cognitively you just can't focus because I call it just cloud, your brain is cloudy. That's physical hunger or biological hunger. There's also habitual hunger. So I was just talking to a cyclist earlier today, and he said, you know, I always eat something after dinner. And I said, oh, well, are you hungry after? And he said, no, it's totally out of habit. And I know I shouldn't do it, but it's my habit. So there is something that's called habitual eating. And the last one is called emotional eating. So if you're stressed, if you're bored, if you're happy, or if you're sad, that will drive you to certain foods, and it's usually comfort foods. So that's kind of the reason why we look at nutrition from a nutrition periodization standpoint instead of just picking apart diets. So from a graphic standpoint, there's a lot on this this slide, so bear with me here, but we basically, just like Shane takes you through different training cycles, those training cycles are on the right. That's called the macrocycle, mesocycle, and microcycle. So the macrocycle is the big picture, usually that 1 year ATP, that annual training plan, right? The mesocycle then goes down, and mesocycle is usually either like 2 or 3, maybe 4-month blocks. And then the microcycle is usually a 7 to 10 day block. So I look at this in nutrition. So I put nutrition in here instead of training. And basically in a macrocycle, we do want to implement metabolic efficiency training. I know I'm teasing you a lot, but basically that is the optimization of blood sugar through food. It's not a diet approach. It's just optimizing blood sugar. So we do want to focus on that throughout the entire year. But then based on your training cycle, and you see 3 of them here, these are the ones that I relate to, and how I call them, or how I refer to them, is the preparatory or prep phase. That's also called base training. There's the competition or in-season phase. There's also the transition, or what's called off-season phase. And as we move down, you can see there's different nutrition happenings, right? So in the preparatory and the competition, we see a blend of what I call food pairing. So putting together foods correctly, looking at antioxidant and anti-inflammatory rich foods. So those kind of share both base training and competition. And you can just see, we look down, as we go down, we get into nutrient timing, we get into post-workout nutrition. Obviously, during competition, there's much more of a need for looking at the energy intake versus energy expenditure, the kilojoules that you're expending on the bike. But now that we're kind of on the left side of this, the preparatory, like with preparatory with the strength focus, that's what we're really going to focus on. So as we go through this now, we are going to focus on the preseason, preparatory, base, whatever we want to call it, right? But focusing on this early season strength focus. So let me share with you just a few goals that I have for this cycle. One, from a nutrition standpoint, is popping the hood, I call it. So get testing done. This could be blood work testing. It could be metabolic efficiency testing. It could be hormone testing, adrenal testing, like whatever. This is the time of the year to do it because your body is actually in a foundation stage. There's not a lot of intensity. There's not a lot of volume that you're doing in terms of training. So I always recommend athletes in the base or early base season or preparatory cycle, get their foundation testing done. This is also the cycle to learn what it means to eat to train. So I'm going to be teaching you that throughout, but it's reversing the paradigm of training to eat and coming back to eating to train, right? Looking at introducing foods that actually reduce oxidation and reduce inflammation. So by far, and you probably know well of these, but these are mostly like your very colorful fruits and vegetables. Those will help in the antioxidants. And then the anti-inflammatory foods are things that you've heard of also probably, right? Salmon, some tuna fish, some mackerel fishes, a lot of fish, not a lot, but some certain fishes are really high in anti-inflammatory compounds. But we also have nuts and we have seeds. Walnuts are fantastic. Chia seeds, flax seeds are great for that. Hemp seeds are great antioxidants and anti-inflammatory. So if we can utilize some of that in our normal nutrition plan, I'm going to give you your first golden nugget if you don't have one yet. In addition to all the foods I just listed, there's this new emerging field in nutrition. It's called nutrigenomics. So basically looking at how nutrition, how food interacts with your genes. What we know is that certain foods, AKA the antioxidants and some of these anti-inflammatory foods, will actually trigger genes and gene systems, switch them on and off. So you can actually influence your oxidation gene pathways and inflammatory gene pathways. Here's the golden nugget. Spices are enormously beneficial for reducing oxidation and reducing inflammation. And it really, honestly, it doesn't matter the spice. It could be basil, oregano, rosemary. What else do we have? Cinnamon, turmeric is a great one. So there are so many spices out there that are now known based on research that will trigger and that will turn on and off these genes specifically to reduce inflammation. So first golden nugget, use as many spices as your taste palate can handle. Okay, lastly, during this cycle, which I'm going to be teaching you here in the next few slides, is implementing this wonderful thing that I've been alluding to, metabolic efficiency training. So looking at the whole picture, nutrition periodization it follows your annual training plan or your whole 12-month cycle, but now we're just kind of focusing in on preparatory strength specific work here for nutrition. Okay. Before you really develop where you go with this and kind of the information that I'm going to present, you should really ask yourself what your goals are from a body standpoint, body weight, body composition, body strength standpoint, because that's how we start aligning the nutrition goals. So if you want to lose weight, if you want to add muscle, right, there are different goals that will facilitate different nutrition strategies. So you should probably, and you probably already know this, but you should probably have a mental note of what am I trying to achieve when this strength focus is actually beginning next week. So keep that in mind as we go along. All right, welcome to metabolic efficiency training. So I actually devised this concept. I will not bore you with the backstory, but this was actually both nutrition periodization and metabolic efficiency training were born in the early to mid 2000s. So they're about 16 to 17 years old now. Obviously, there are a couple books on both, but let me just introduce metabolic efficiency training. You have two basic stores of nutrients in your body. Those are carbohydrate and that's fat. We don't store protein as protein. Protein actually gets denatured and metabolized into amino acids, and you store amino acids, but not the whole protein. So we don't really look at the storage of amino acids because those usually don't contribute a lot to the energy that you need to live and to train and to recover, right? So what we look at are your fat stores and your carbohydrate stores. And here's what we know, and this is all based on science, all based on physiology and biochemistry and metabolism. We know that about the average person, unless you're like super, super lean, the average person has anywhere between about 80,000 to 100,000 calories worth of fat in your body. Now, you're looking down and you may say, I don't see it. Like, where is it? We actually have a lot of organ and intra-abdominal fat that sometimes you can't see, right? So the point is that you don't have to look large and look like you have a lot of subcutaneous fat to actually have a lot of fat stores, right? Even lean athletes like those toothpick marathon runners, right? They still have about 30,000, 40,000 calories worth of fat in their body. So here's the thing. We have a lot of fat stores, but as you can see right below, we are very limited in carbohydrates. So an adult male, a large adult male, maybe, over 200 pounds, 6 foot or above, they probably have around 2,000, give or take a couple hundred calories worth of carbohydrates stored in their liver, their muscle, and just a little bit floating around in their blood. If you're smaller, if you're more petite females, they usually have around 1,200 to 1,400 calories. So as you can see here, if you're doing the math and you're looking at this correctly, we don't really store a lot of carbs. That is the number one limiter to athletic performance is carbohydrate, or what's called glycogen, which is a storage form of carbohydrate, glycogen depletion. So I had this funny idea years ago. I said, well, if we have so many fat stores and not a lot of carb stores, we keep on putting carbs in our body. We do need them at certain points, but is there an opportunity to actually teach our body to use the fat that is being stored? And can we do that outside of exercise training? The answer is, of course, yes, we can do it through nutrition. And here's where we're going with this. I'm going to teach you how to incorporate, and I really hate to use these terms, but I am going to use them. Fat burning and carbohydrate burning, right? The proper term in my world is oxidation versus burning, but I'm going to use burning, right? So it means the same thing. It's just a little bit easier to understand. So when we look at this, metabolic efficiency in terms of the science, there are two ways to manipulate your body's ability to store fat and burn carbohydrate, or store carbohydrate and burn fat. Now, it all comes back to your goals, right? So what are your goals? Now, for a strength phase, you may want to strategically incorporate more carbohydrate and protein. Actually, you do. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later here, right? And absolutely strength phase. But here's the thing, as you get into base phase and maybe you want to whittle down the pounds or get a little bit lighter on the bike, affect your watts to kg, right? Maybe you do want to incorporate more fat burning strategies. Well, we know that about 75% of your body's ability to burn fat and store carbohydrate is based on your daily nutrition plan. 25% is based on exercise, specifically aerobic exercise. Remember the two energy systems I presented earlier. Aerobic exercise improves your mitochondrial ability to burn fat, right? It's been known for decades in exercise physiology. However, not many researchers before I brought this up really looked at the nutrition components. So we know that your body, you can actually train your body literally to burn more fat and store carbs, or burn more carbs and store fat, depending on which way you want to go, right? You can be very what's called metabolically flexible. So the graph that you see here is a very good simulation of what happens throughout different exercise intensities. So the red line is fat burning, the blue line is carbohydrate burning. As we're sitting here right now, we should be burning a whole bunch of fat and not too many carbohydrates because our intensity is very low. But if we get up and we walk around the room, or maybe we hop on our trainer and we start spinning a little bit, or we go in our weight room, we start lifting some heavier weights, the intensity is going to increase. As intensity increases, it actually incorporates more of that anaerobic energy system, which means we need more carbohydrate. So at a certain intensity point, which we can actually measure, I'm gonna make you salivate towards the end because I'm gonna show you two little case studies I just did with two cyclists, phenomenal results. And I'm gonna show you, but you can actually have this measured. And this is the graph that I'm showing you right now. This is just basic exercise physiology 101. But it basically says, as you go from low intensity on the left to high intensity on the right, there's gonna be a point somewhere in there most of the time. And I say most of the time because I've actually tested athletes who did not have this metabolic efficiency point. But let's just suffice to say, somewhere throughout that intensity, you should cross or shift from fat burning to carbohydrate burning. And that's what you're seeing by this star, right? That star indicates where we shift from fat to carbohydrate burning, or the majority, I should say, right? Now, here's what I'll tell you. Down below, I call it real life testing. I've tested hundreds and hundreds of athletes doing this. I have found that either athletes have no metabolic efficiency point, meaning they burn carbohydrates like crazy and they don't burn a lot of fat, or they actually burn fat at very high intensity. So let me give you a little background. Exercise Physiology 101 about 50, 60 years ago said, yes, our bodies cross over, just like I showed you up here, but the researchers found that happens between 63 to 65% max intensity. So max intensity could be max VO2 or it could be max heart rate. But that's very, very old data. The data I have done, and this is real life, this is not research. The data I have done, I have seen that metabolic efficiency point go up to 87% of an athlete's VO2. And here's the great news. This paper came out about 3 years ago that actually said, well, athletes' metabolic efficiency point in their research of hundreds of athletes actually happened between 23% max intensity all the way up to 89% intensity. So the take-home message here is, who cares? Well, this is why you should care and what you should care about. You can adapt your body to burn fat at higher intensities, higher percentage of your FTP. You just have to do a few nutrition strategies to do that. At certain times of the year, you want that. At certain times of the year, you need to be very focused on carbohydrate burning. If you do, it depends on your distance and what your mode is in cycling, right? If you're going to do a lot of TT or crits, or you're going to do more road races and more stage races, right? So obviously, the longer events, you kind of set yourself up better if you can burn more fat at higher intensities. The shorter events, you actually want to be burning carbohydrates like crazy because you need that anaerobic energy system development. So I hope I explained that well enough. If I didn't, we can certainly chat about it in our Q&A. So let's move on here. This is where it all kind of where the rubber meets the road, right? The focus here is all blood sugar regulation. Why? Because blood sugar is regulated by hormones food is actually influenced by, or actually influences some of these hormones. So let me tell you the story, because we're getting closer to actually learning how to do this with food. So hopefully I've made the point what metabolic efficiency is. Now I'm going to tell you why it's so important. So if your blood sugar looks like this, I call it the very unhappy blood sugar line, right? Looks like a roller coaster, right? So each peak and valley, you might be feeling great as you're increasing your blood sugar, might be feeling like top of the world, but then at a certain point you're going to crash, just like a roller coaster, although roller coasters don't crash most of the time. But as you go down, what's happening is you're very vulnerable. Not only are you vulnerable for cravings and for eating really weird foods and maybe high calorie foods that you probably shouldn't eat at some points, but what happens is from a hormonal level, it is turning off the system to burn fat. So, and I'll get into this here in a second. The happy blood sugar line is what we want to do. And here's the great news. You can easily do this. Here's your next golden nugget by looking at combining protein, fiber found in fruits and vegetables and whole grains, and fat. So protein, fiber, fat. We'll be telling this story here in a second. So why do we want to focus on the happy blood sugar line versus the unhappy? Well, because they are influenced specifically by this hormone insulin. I know you've heard about insulin before. It's actually a very beneficial hormone. One of its roles is actually to reduce blood sugar. So when your blood sugar is high, your body releases insulin from the pancreas. Insulin swoops in, brings your blood sugar low, you are happy, you're going on about your day, everything is fine. However, what not a lot of people know, and this is actually biochemistry 101, when insulin is high, it actually has this synergistic effect of reducing, almost turning off your body's ability to burn fat. So whenever your blood sugar is high blood sugar peak, high insulin, low fat burning. In fact, you're storing more fat than you are burning fat. That's usually not the good thing to do in terms of health and performance. So obviously, when you go on this blood sugar roller coaster, if you don't control it too well, it leads to mental and physical decreases in performance, decreases focus and concentration, which we need just throughout our life and work and family and everything we do. It increases hunger and decreases the fullness factor. So usually I see athletes who are hungry about every 90 minutes. That's most likely because they're not regulating blood sugar that well. Biologically, just on the side, biologically, your hunger response kicks in about every 3 to 4 hours. In a non-diabetic state, about every 3 to 4 hours, you should be eating something, right? And then lastly, as I said, if you're uncontrolled blood sugar, you are burning more carbohydrate and storing more fat. And that's usually the opposite of most athletes want to do, especially during this time of the year. Okay, so how do we do it? Well, I've kind of set you up, right? Next chapter is actually looking at food. Like, how do we actually do this? And I want to leave you with this because I want you to have the tools to be able to navigate your nutrition throughout the next couple months, right? And I want you to interact with Shane and be able to figure this out. So I firmly believe in simple is sustainable. I don't believe in counting calories, except when you're on the bike. Like, we need to know what's going in, obviously, compared to what's coming out. But during the daily nutrition, I have made a super simple model to follow, and I call it my fuel target, right? Looks like a dartboard. There are 3 rungs. The first, the center, the bullseye, is protein and fat. The second, the blue, is fruits and veggies. And then the third, the green, are whole grains and what I call healthier starches. Now, the little dots on the outside are what I call misses. So let me explain this. This doesn't depict that protein is the most important nutrient. It doesn't at all. Why I made it this way is because most cyclists, most endurance athletes forget about protein. This is a very important nutrient, as most of us know, not only during the aging process, because if we're all over 40 here, we have to worry about this wonderful aging thing called sarcopenia. And I say wonderful sarcastically also. Sarcopenia is the age-related loss of muscle mass, and this is going to feed into our strength-specific talk here. Protein is such an important, powerful nutrient to slow the loss of muscle mass. You can't stop it, but you can certainly slow it. How do you slow sarcopenia, or the age-related loss of muscle mass? You lift weights, or what I call moving heavy things, right, at the right times of the year, and you make sure you have enough protein. We'll get into that when we talk about nutrient timing in terms of when you're doing it, how much to do it. But suffice to say, when you build your breakfast, your lunch, your dinner, your snacks, 90% of the time, you want to try to focus on identifying protein first. So chicken, fish, beef, steak, pork, cheese, dairy product, like it doesn't matter, right? It has to be protein. Put the protein on your plate or base it on your meal first, then add color, add your fruits and veggies, maybe add some whole grains or healthier starches if you need more carbohydrates. Now, here's the thing. During base training, especially in the strength phase, you may not need a ton of carbohydrates if the volume of on your bike is actually lower, right? So what we want to do is we want to focus on getting the right types of carbohydrates in, the fruits and veggies that have high antioxidant, high anti-inflammatory, and maybe reduce the whole grains right now because maybe your volume, you just don't need a lot of carbohydrates from whole grains yet because it's not the right training cycle. So 90% of the time, you're gonna focus on protein, you're gonna build color around it, you're gonna maybe put some whole grains if you need extra carbohydrates. 10% of the time, you allow your body to what I call miss, or they could be called speed bumps, right? So if you like, if you like alcohol, that belongs in a miss. If you like chips, donuts, cookies, things like that. Like if it's not like a significant protein, fruit or vegetable, and whole grain, that's in the miss category. So I really like to find it's a balance, but I kind of take the athletes I work with, I kind of take it to a higher level, and I want them to focus on 90% in their target, 10% outside the target. So that's the overall concept of how to look at food. When we actually look at this, and I kind of talked about why protein is so important. When we look at this, the next question I inevitably get is, well, that's great, Bob. You want me to focus on protein, then I put some color around it, maybe some whole grains, but how much do I eat? Well, it's very individual, we know that, but I set up this next very qualitative model. This is what I call my hand model. And if you look at your hands, right, the hand, as I refer to it, is your wrist all the way up to your fingertips. So the entire hand, not your palm, not your thumb, not your finger, like the whole entire hand, right? So I am actually periodizing, remember that wonderful nutrition periodization. I am periodizing your carbohydrate and protein. Why am I not talking about fat? Well, if you are a vegetarian or a vegan, this is a little bit more difficult, but I'm just going to make the assumption, actually didn't ask Shane this, but I'm going to make the assumption that the majority of you are non-vegan or vegetarian, right? You may have some plant-based meals and that's fantastic, but you still eat animal-based protein. So that's my assumption. So with that assumption going forward, the proteins that you eat will actually have fat in them. So if you eat chicken, chicken has fat. If you have milk, milk has fat. If you have peanut butter has fat. Eggs have fat, right? So I don't really focus on the fat because as long as you're getting enough protein, you should, in theory, have enough fat also. Now, here's why it's carbohydrate to protein ratio. I actually did not pull this out of the air. Years and years and years ago, decades ago, right? I was looking through the research and trying to figure out if there's an ideal ratio to control or optimize blood sugar. And lo and behold, there is. And guess where it came from? People with diabetes. So what we know with people with diabetes is they need to regulate their blood sugar extremely well, unless, of course, we don't want to talk about what could happen if they don't, right? And obviously death could happen. So I looked at diabetes research and I applied it to athletes. And here's the take-home message here. We can look at the ratio between carbohydrates, and this is why my hand model exists, very, very simple. So one hand is your carbohydrate. So think of that as a fruit or a vegetable. And one hand is protein. So that could be chicken, it could be fish, it could be steak, it could be eggs, whatever it is, right? There's a lot of wiggle room here. I'm gonna say that straight up. This is not a quantitative model because you're literally looking at what will fit in your hand. Like how many eggs can I fit in my hand? How many pieces of cantaloupe can I fit in my hand? Like that's how qualitative it is. If you're a quantitative person, you can certainly count the grams and do this 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, or 4-to-1 ratio. And that's just a matter of hands from a carbohydrate hand to a protein hand. As you look at the bottom though, here's when I recommend using these different ratios. So that 1-to-1 ratio, we know number one, it is ideal for blood sugar regulation, which means, remember again, you control your blood sugar, you turn on your fat burning, right? So you're burning more fat and you're storing carbohydrate until you really need it. So that 1-to-1 ratio is really good for like off season, if you want weight loss, or if you're doing like an early prep, early base cycle. I don't know how many of you would do that right now, especially with the strength focus. So we're going to move more to 2-to-1. 2 to 1 is usually during the preparation, which could be now, kind of during a strength focus, could be during competition, could be even during a transition or an off site or off season if you don't have body weight goals. So bottom line here is if you have body weight or body composition goals, that 1 to 1 works beautifully. The 2 to 1 still regulates your blood sugar very good. It's just not ideal, but it's still very, very okay to eat, right, in terms of the carbohydrate. So you have 2 hands of carbs to 1 hand of protein. Now, as we get into the 3 to 1, 4 to 1, that's usually more like in season, like competition, or you're trying to recover from a really tough workout. For a strength focus, unless you're lifting like really heavy weights or you're doing a lot of plyometrics, you probably don't need to worry about that 3 to 1 or 4 to 1. However, if you are doing really heavy or will be doing really heavy weights or doing a lot of plyometrics, a lot of bounding, a lot of jumping, then recovering that way in that 3 to 1 or 4 to 1, which we'll talk about here in a second, that would be ideal because remember again, intensity of exercise goes up, your need for carbohydrates also go up, right? So keep that in mind. So I would guess most of you are probably good to float between that 1 to 1 to 2 to 1 ratio right now, with the occasional 3 to 1, maybe even 4 to 1 after a really tough strength workout. That's my assumption, but we can chat about that. So that's that's kind of bringing it a little bit more out in the open, saying, all right, he wants me to focus on protein, build color around it, but he also wants to tell me, like he's giving me some ideas of the volume now. Now, here's the thing. The ratio is what is important. So say you want to do a snack throughout the day. I don't expect you to eat that volume of food. That is a lot of volume for a snack, right? Unless you're, really, really young in your teens or 20s, and you can probably get away with that. We want to just keep the ratio, but we just half it, right? So it's a 50-50, but the ratio is what's important, that 1 to 1 or 2 to 1, right? So with a snack, you can shrink everything, just maintain that ratio as close as possible. Okay, moving on here. This is a great way, actually a great homework for you is to actually make what I call a food list and make these columns, right? So make a column of protein and fat, and then write down or type in what proteins and fats do you like? Do you like chicken? Do you like peanut butter? Do you like salmon? And then write down what fruits and veggies you like, what whole grains, and what misses you enjoy. 90% of the time, remember, it kind of focuses on those first three, and then 10% of the time you get to miss or you allow yourself to miss. Not a big fan of cheat days. I think there's a very negative connotation to cheating, but I call them misses or speed bumps, right? I think those are much more healthy. That's that healthy relationship with food that I was talking about earlier. So moving on to nutrient timing, this is where it becomes fun because inevitably an athlete will ask me throughout the entire year, they'll say, well, what should I eat before a workout? And first thing I need to know is, well, what training cycle are you in, number one? But number two, what are you trying to do from a physiological adaptation standpoint? So we know that you guys are entering a strength phase. You're going to be hitting the weight room or the strength room, your home room, home gym, right? Whatever it is, right? Not a lot of training on the bike just yet, or not a lot of intense training, right? So focusing on the strength, here's what we know. We know that fluid, carbohydrate, protein, fat, and electrolytes are the most important nutrients when we're talking about before, during, and after workouts. And you can see that in the columns, right? Let me just go through these really quick and then I'll highlight the strength focus. So before training, which is usually that 1 to 3 hours, but remember again, this is just preparatory. It's just base training with a strength focus. I call it the Goldilocks prehydration. There's really no such thing as an exact amount of hydration or fluid that you need before a workout, because we're all individual. We have individual sweat rates, we have individual sweat sodium concentration. So the Goldilocks is not too little, not too much, just right in the middle. So if you've been cycling for a while, you inevitably know when you're hydrated and dehydrated. So you're probably knowing about where you're at. Now, keep in mind, we are entering the winter. Things change during the winter depending on where you're at, right? It gets colder most of the time. So your sweat rate changes a little bit. So we just know that you want to make sure to continually teach yourself about your sweat rate, about your fluid needs from winter, spring, summer, and fall, because it will change a little bit. Going down in that pre-workout window, we're going to talk specifically about carbohydrate and protein here in a second, but I just want to highlight carbohydrate and protein can certainly be from a meal or a snack, or you can have like a drink, like a whey protein shake. It kind of depends on what sits in your stomach well, right? Before strength training, I have seen a lot of athletes, most of them are usually fine with eating a solid food or like a semi-solid food rather than a lot of sport nutrition products. And in fact, this is the time of the year where you shouldn't focus too much on sport nutrition products. From a fat standpoint, you don't need a lot of fat before strength training or before a workout right now. You need a little bit in food, but not a ton. And then from electrolytes, you don't really need a ton of electrolytes. Like if you're going back to summer and you put a lot of miles, a lot of hours in the saddle, you obviously need more electrolytes then when you're outside versus indoors now. So I usually don't really pick on electrolytes that much. I usually just want them coming through foods. So during, kind of going to that third column here, so during exercise or during training, usually want about 3 to 6 ounces of fluid every 15 to 20 minutes, but that's completely dated research, very, very old. It still kind of holds up with some people, but I've seen some athletes need double that or triple that depending on their sweat rates, right? So we just want to make sure, and this is what I alluded to earlier, just make sure you're doing some sweat rate testing throughout the year. And that's just as easy as weighing yourself naked on the scale before and after a workout, right? And there are a lot of online calculators where you plug in your weight, you plug in everything, and it'll tell you actually how much fluid you lost. That's a good strategy to do throughout the year. Carbohydrate, protein during training, which is focusing on strength. Now we're going to come to that back in a second. So I'm going to push the pause button and come back to that. From a fat perspective, we don't need any fat, not during strength training. Absolutely not. Maybe during the season, you're doing some ultra cycling, maybe sometimes that, but definitely not now. Electrolytes during strength training, usually not necessary unless you're doing like 2-hour sessions in the weight room or in the strength in your strength room, right? But right now you can usually get by with water, although we will talk about protein here in a second. And then afterwards, it really, so here's the thing when it comes to post-workout nutrition. After you exercise, your body is actually in a prime position to burn fat. Depending on what you put in it after working out, you can accelerate that fat burning or you can actually turn it off. So here's an example. If you just put in a lot of like what's a good example here, like bagels, and like after a workout, if you put like bagels and jelly and jam, like all that like really high carbohydrate, high glycemic index response food, that high carbohydrate feeding will actually spike your blood sugar, which will do what? It'll turn off your fat burning or significantly reduce your fat burning. But here's what it will do. That high carbohydrate feeding post-workout will restore your carbohydrates, your glycogen, much faster. So depending on what your goals are, now I again make the assumption because it's base training, it's a strength focus, you probably don't need to replenish your carbohydrate stores that quickly. And here's why. Because, and not a lot of people know this because the sport nutrition companies, the product companies, they don't want you to know this. You can recover 100% of your glycogen stores, your carbohydrate stores, within 16 to 24 hours after a training session, just on your normal daily nutrition. So let me repeat that one more time. You can recover all of your glycogen stores in 16 to 24 hours with following your normal dietary approach. So you don't need, what I'm saying is you don't need to be aggressive in your carbohydrate supplementation after strength training. You just need a little bit of carbohydrate and a little bit of protein. And I am getting there in just one second. Do we need fat and electrolytes afterwards? Not necessarily. We definitely don't need fat because that can actually slow the absorption of carbohydrate and protein. Electrolytes, there's no harm, no foul if you're going to have an electrolyte beverage, but you don't necessarily need them per se after a strength workout. And again, now I'm focusing purely on strength. So here's what we need to know about strength training and aging for that matter, right? I played the aging card and I think, from my standpoint, I'm over 40, so I can play that card, right? We need to focus on the age-related loss of muscle mass. It happens, we need to slow it down. How do we slow it down? Strength train, move heavy things, and get enough protein. But here's what we know with strength sessions. So if you're gonna go, I'm gonna call it lifting or moving heavy things, I'll just call it lifting. If you're gonna lift, we absolutely need carbohydrate and protein together, usually in a ratio of about 2 parts carbohydrate to 1 part protein. You could probably go down to 1 to 1 carb, 1 protein, that would be fine. And it just needs to be a little snack. But here's, I am gonna be quantitative just because a lot of the research promotes this for sarcopenia and for age-related loss of muscle mass with strength training. We need roughly 10 to 20 grams of protein before strength training and after strength training, right? Now, you may have heard of this, maybe not, but there is a specific amino acid. So remember, amino acid is the byproduct of protein, it's denatured. Leucine is the most powerful amino acid that actually stimulates what we call protein synthesis. So let me go back here. Why are we lifting weights? Well, we're lifting weights to break down our muscle tissue so they can rebuild, right? We're also lifting weights to get stronger. As as our lean muscle breaks down, that is actually affecting protein synthesis. So what we don't want to do is start a strength session with this much protein synthesis and end it with this much. We don't want to have what's called a negative balance with protein synthesis. We want to try to maintain protein synthesis as closely as possible. How do we do that? We focus on at least 10 to 20 grams of protein, and then what would that be? At least 10 to 40 grams of carbohydrate. During a strength workout, I really don't believe you need that much, again, unless it's going into that 90-minute, 2-hour nature, or if it's super high intensity, which I don't believe it's going to be, at least early on. Afterwards, we need to repeat what you did earlier, about 10 to 20 grams of protein and about 10 to 40 grams of carbohydrate. And that can be in any form. Here's what we know though, if it's in liquid form, it actually absorbs much faster. So that could be a bonus. That could be like a smoothie, that could be like a shake. Chocolate milk usually gets a bad rap, but chocolate milk is actually a 3-to-1 ratio normally, and it's lower fat if you choose that option, and chocolate milk has leucine in it. So what I'm trying to get at, leucine-rich foods, you get a lot from dairy products, a lot of leucine. You'll get it through like whey protein powders, certainly, or other protein powders, but leucine is the most important protein or amino acid that stimulates protein synthesis. So I'm not saying you have to take a leucine supplement. I'm just saying that we need to make sure that you have enough leucine. And if you do mixed protein sources, most likely you're going to have it. Unless you're a vegetarian, then it gets a little trickier. But if you're an animal-based protein eater, normally you're going to get enough leucine in there if you follow that 10 to 20 grams of protein. So I call that the bookends, right? So in the front of the workout and the back of the workout, we want to support that strength workout by providing enough protein and carbs on the front end and on the back end. That is the biggest take-home message, because a lot of athletes mess that up. They maybe have a small snack during, or maybe like a banana or something beforehand, and then afterwards they have this huge meal, which is fine, but we need to be very steady with our protein beforehand and our protein after. And just kind of going back a few slides, if you can remember that metabolic efficiency where I said focus on protein, all of the research on sarcopenia, on weight stability, and even protein synthesis, it all points to one thing in terms of daily protein intake, and that is an equal distribution. This is a huge golden nugget. Equal distribution of protein throughout the day. So instead of having those really big, so maybe you have, a handful of protein at breakfast and then half a hand at lunch and then 3 hands at dinner, that's actually not the best approach, because your body wants to always go through a more of an equal or homeostatic protein synthesis throughout the day. So what a lot of the research has found and concluded is that you want to try to maintain about equal portions of protein throughout the day, roughly speaking. Now, before and after a strength session, it could be a little different, because usually during a meal, you're going to have a lot more protein than you would during a snack. And the snack is usually that pre and post strength workout feeding. So I'm hoping I'm making sense here, and I'm hoping I'm really emphasizing the need for protein, but also the need for carbohydrate, right? You need carbohydrates before and after strength sessions also. Okay, so let's talk about supplements really quick, because these questions always come up. The question of, should I take a supplement? Well, I can't tell you that, but I can educate you on the 3 classes of supplements, and maybe we get a little bit closer. So there are 3 classes. The first is micronutrients, and those are things like your multivitamin, your calcium, iron, zinc. Specifically, these days, we're really looking at sorry about that. We're really looking at vitamin D and immune supporting supplements. Now, vitamin D, all the time, like there's so many athletes who are deficient in vitamin D, but there's actually been some research on vitamin D levels and COVID, and with individuals having lower vitamin D, they're more susceptible to COVID. So keep your vitamin D levels up. How do you know that? You have to get it tested. That is like one of the most important tests to do right now, is just a vitamin D blood work test. Super cheap, super easy to do. If it is low, you absolutely need to start supplementing, because you cannot eat enough vitamin D rich foods to get out of a deficit. Once you get out of the deficit, you might be able to maintain with foods, but you can't get out of that deficit. So micronutrients, number 1. Number 2 are sports supplements. So During preseason, preparatory, base training, whatever we call it right now, you don't need a lot of sport supplements. Like you don't need to be doing a lot of sport or energy bars and gels and drinks and electrolytes. You just don't. Like those are usually when you start building a little bit, and definitely during competition. So right now I just say calm down a little bit. Like every so often here and there, totally fine. Like if you want to use some protein powder, totally fine. But you don't need a lot of the stuff right now because the training cycle that you're in. Lastly, are ergogenic aids. So those are what I call pills, powders, and potions. And two that I really just want to highlight are caffeine, number one, because a lot of people use caffeine, coffee, tea, whatever it is, but a lot of people don't really utilize it to its ergogenic benefits. So ergogenic means performance enhancing. Caffeine, although now is really not the time or the training cycle to be talking about this, but keep this in your brain. When you get closer to like your build cycle and your competition cycle, if you're using caffeine for performance enhancing purposes, it needs to be dosed based on your body weight. That's all I'm going to say right now. Like your morning cup of coffee, two to 6 cups, whatever you drink, totally fine right now. But if you're going to try to use it strategically during the season, let's talk when we get to that point, because it needs to be titrated based on your body weight. The one big thing I do want to talk about is creatine right now. So creatine is probably the most researched ergogenic aid on the market. What we know is it absolutely works in conjunction with strength training to improve muscle mass and muscle functioning. I actually recommend creatine to some aging athletes, AKA us over 40, if they are engaging in a strength program and if they're not too concerned like with body weight, because creatine will add a few pounds of body weight here and there, although you could argue throughout time it could be muscle mass, right? But creatine could be very beneficial because there's actually some research being done on creatine in older individuals and masters athletes where it's beneficial to supplement with that during specific training cycles, AKA strength cycles. So that could be something on your list that you might want to say, I want to take a look at that a little bit. It's absolutely safe as long as you get, safe supplements. So that's kind of your supplement 101. I do want to go really quickly because we talked about that metabolic efficiency. I'm super jazzed because I actually just tested these athletes and I've got some data on them that I wanted to share with you. And I said, I alluded earlier that you can actually test your metabolic efficiency or test where that metabolic efficiency point will happen. You need a lab or a performance center that has the technology. It's called a metabolic cart to actually do the testing. But I'm going to show you two slides. I know there are a lot of males on here, so I apologize. These are two female cyclists. It's not on purpose. It's just these are the last two that I tested, so I've got data on them, fresh data on them. So the slide is going to look a little messy at first, so bear with me as I explain this. Okay. This was done on a 39-year-old female, kind of a recreational cyclist, right? She's a mother of two, just recreational, right? Here's what we're looking at. I did 2 metabolic efficiency tests on her. That green box tells you her metabolic efficiency point on her first test, which was August 19th, about a couple months ago. And then her second test, which is the yellow box, it was done last week on October 20th. Now, let me explain these lines because they kind of should look familiar, right? The first test is indicated by the gray carbohydrate line that starts with 41%. And the pink fat line that starts with 59%. That was her first metabolic efficiency test. So if you just follow the gray line and the pink line from left to right, what we see is at that point of 137 beats per minute, her heart rate, and 115 watts, that's where her body crossed or basically needed more carbohydrate to support her exercise. Right? So we implemented exactly what I was talking to you about, controlling and optimizing blood sugar. She actually stayed very close to that 1-to-1 ratio for a couple months, that carbohydrate to protein ratio. 2 months later, 8 weeks later, you can see follow the red line and the black line. So the red line is fat burning test 2. The black line is carbohydrate burning test 2. So what happened was that metabolic efficiency line actually moved 1.5 stages to the right. So now her body was burning fat at a higher intensity, or in this case, 165 beats per minute and 155 watts. I like to show this, she increased it by 40 watts in her metabolic efficiency in 2 months. I like to bring this up because a lot of individuals are still in that old school, and I say a lot of researchers specifically, and even some coaches that I've met throughout my years, they're still in that old school of thinking you can't burn fat at high intensities and you can't change where your body burns fat. You absolutely can, and this is data that shows you that this is proof in the pudding, right? Absolutely, hands down. So this is a lady I actually just tested this morning. So this is a little bit younger, 31-year-old female. She's a little bit more competitive recreational cyclist, right? So same exact thing. Let's look at the green box was her first test in August, where her metabolic efficiency point was 33 beats per minute, 160 watts. Her test this morning was 164 beats per minute and 210 watts. That's a 50-watt increase in 10 weeks. And again, following that pink and gray line, that's your test one, fat burning pink, carbohydrate burning gray. And then second test this morning was fat burning red, carbohydrate burning black. So you can see she actually went 2.5 stages more to the right, and we added a stage. She went up to 240 watts this morning, finished that stage, whereas the test 2 months ago, she wasn't able to go up there. So that's just, I just wanted to show you that, there is actually quantitative data to show you that manipulating your nutrition can actually improve your body's metabolism and your body's ability to either store fat and burn carbs or store carbs and burn fat, depending on what you want to do. So I'm not here to tell you that one is right. It really depends on your training cycle, your health goals, and your performance goals. So that said, I am going to say thank you. I'm going to first give you a couple of resources because I know Shane would allow me to do this. I do have some great ebooks. I've got some hard copy books too, but great recipe books, because inevitably athletes say, "Oh my gosh, how do I eat this way?" If you need some more help, I've got a plant-based metabolic efficiency ebook. I've got a normal one. I've got a smoothie book. I also have this wonderful company that I founded a couple of years ago that we, with another dietitian and I, sport dietitian, we actually create a cocoa, a creamer, and what we call an anti-oatmeal. We call it smart oatmeal. But these products are all based on my metabolic efficiency concept to optimize blood sugar. There's no preservatives, basically no crap in there. But I wanted to redefine the cocoa, the creamer, and the oatmeal market. And that's why Baroda Foods was born. So you can kind of check that out if you would like. And last but not least, I think we're just about ready to open up for questions. But if you have any questions, I mean, obviously Shane knows how to get a hold of me. I'm going to give you my web address, my website, my email address. If you have any, like what I would say, easy questions, shoot me an email. Like the complex question, we should probably schedule a consult. But the easy questions, I'm more than happy to answer those. In fact, let's open it up to see if you do have questions now.
Awesome. All right, so I'm gonna unmute everybody quickly, and then I'll start, Bob. So
Yeah.
my question was more on the spices.
Yep.
Sorry,
Yep.
hang on. Doing two things at once here. Sorry. Does the spice matter whether it's fresh or dried in terms of that?
Great question. Great question. It's almost like a fruit or vegetable. Like it's still going to have the properties, the anti-inflammatory, the antioxidant properties. It's better if it's fresh, but I mean, you should see my spice cabinet. Like it is, like I have every dried
That's
spice
what I mean.
possible. So
I have
here's what I say.
spices.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. So fresh, what I say is fresh whenever you can, but please use dried almost all the other times, because sometimes it's a hassle to use fresh. So they're going to have about the same benefit, but fresh just kind of edges out the dried just a little bit.
Got it. Yeah, that was really fascinating.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Joe's unmuted. Joe, do you have a question?
No.
Oh, you just unmuted yourself?
Yeah.
Just wanted to be part of the convo. Cool.
I have a question.
Awesome. Yes, sir.
This is Chris. I appreciate all the great information about metabolism. It's fascinating stuff. I have a question that's a little bit different and outside of strength training. I've had 2 really bad fractures in the last 3 years, and I'm getting my bone health checked in a couple of weeks, but
good.
I've been prescribed calcium and D3 together. I assume they go together. I don't really know the reasons why. But I also heard some people saying, well, actually one person in particular saying taking calcium supplements may be counterproductive in that it may have adverse effects on vascular arteries, whatever, hardening of the arteries. And I wonder if you had any opinion on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very sensitive topic, because whenever you get into supplementation like that, so the easy answer is you don't always. I understand the fractures for sure, right? So the first thing actually I would do if you haven't had this done before, Chris, is have your vitamin D checked. Did you have that checked yet?
Yeah, I'm in the normal range. I'm just a little bit. I'm pretty close to the low end of the range.
Okay. So here's a little bit of a tidbit here. A lot of times normal physicians, their normal range is not my normal range for athletes. So I don't know if off the top of your head, you know that number, but I'm going to give you my range for athletes. So normally I like to see athletes between 50 and 70. And there are two different units that are usually used with vitamin D. So it depends on the units being reported, but a lot of times you'll be under that, but still in the normal, because the normal for normal people is all the way down to 30. So, I tag it if you're below 50, you have to supplement vitamin D. But yes, the calcium works synergistically with the vitamin D, but I would actually refer that question. Like the first thing I thought about was having like a calcium scan from your cardiologist, right? Because they do that these days, and they look at the calcium score. If you've ever had that done before, that would kind of rule out if taking that calcium and the vitamin D3 together would actually contribute to that calcium buildup in your arteries or not. So I would actually have that done prior to taking that cocktail of vitamin D and calcium. Super fine to take vitamin D on its own though.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I know I'm at 30, is it 30 milligrams per deciliter? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that would be low by your scale.
You're just about half of what I like to see athletes. So what I would recommend is at least 5,000 to 10,000 IUs per day of vitamin D for 30 days. And then you could probably do a maintenance dose of 1,000 to 2,000 per day from there on. But you need kind of an aggressive for 30 days to get those stores back up again, especially since we're getting into the winter time now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. Great question.
Yeah.
Shane, can I put one in?
Of course, yeah. Open forum.
So, Bob, you talked about mitochondria. Could you give us an analogy or a simple explanation of what the hell that is?
So mitochondria is where energy is produced in your body. So in a cellular standpoint, that's like the factory that produces the cars, right? So that is producing all the energy that your body needs to basically sustain life or performance for that matter. So you can't see it, you can't feel it, but if you were to look at some blood under a microscope, you would actually see the mitochondria. So it's kind of the factory that produces energy.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. Judging from the silence, I don't think we have any more questions.
Yeah.
Cool. We're a little bit over too, so thank you for going over.
Oh, sorry about that. I apologize.
Totally fine.
Yeah.
I appreciate you going over. So I will have this in recording tomorrow, and then I'll send everybody the recording if you were late, and then Bob's email. He's a great guy. Reach out to him if you have any basic questions. And yeah. We'll see Bob again probably in a couple months once we're into our base phases. He'll do another presentation about how to change nutrition based on the base phase instead of going from strength to base. But yeah.
And now you've got a great foundation, right? Because we covered nutrition periodization, then we just get to go to the next phase. I love it. Love it.
Yeah. So this will be watch this video first before you attend meeting number 2. I'll kind of run it that way.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for your time.
Well,
man.
I'm honored. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak to your wonderful athletes tonight.
Of course. It's my pleasure.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Shane.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The other hand.
Thank you. One hand.
See you later.